You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, we have the nightmare scenario for Donald Trump's top ally, top attorney, Rudy Giuliani. Can you explain what just happened today?
Brian, it's the end of the financial line for Rudy Giuliani because a judge just ordered that the two Georgia state election workers that he defamed savagely, whose lives he put in danger, courtesy of the lies he told about them stuffing ballot boxes. The judge just ordered that within 7 days, they will take possession of almost all of Rudy Giuliani's assets. What will that include? Well, his Manhattan apartment, which is, I think, worth more than $6 million, if I recall the reporting accurately, his very expensive vintage Mercedes-Benz, his, very expensive watch collection. He's got like 26 very high-end wristwatches, because who doesn't? They will also get a good amount of the money in his bank accounts, though it's not being reported what that money totals up to. They're going to get some really expensive sports memorabilia and more. So this is pretty much the end of the financial line for Rudy Giuliani. Of course, he also has potential criminal liability coming up once he goes to trial in the case or cases in which he's criminally indicted. So, things just kind of go from bad to worse for Rudy Giuliani. And this is all, problems of his own making, because he hitched his wagon to Donald Trump. He told lies relentlessly, violence-inducing lies. And, it's all finally coming home to roost.
Explain to me the mechanics of what this is going to look like. So the apartment just has the title transferred to his name to theirs? Does he have to sell it and then they get the money? How does this actually work?
I don't know, like the TikTok, the nuts and bolts of exactly how it happens. But what I do know, Brian, is the judge ordered that they will take possession of it. Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, the two Georgia state election workers that Rudy Giuliani defamed, they will take possession within the next 7 days. And the judge said they can immediately put it on the market and sell it so they can collect. Now, I didn't see any reporting about whether they could literally decide to keep it for themselves, but I would think that highly unlikely. They will probably sell it. One thing that everybody should keep in mind, a jury ordered that Rudy Giuliani should pay more than $140 million for his, chronic defamation of those two women. And then Rudy tried to go into bankruptcy court, and he told the bankruptcy judge that he was only worth about $10.6 million. Well, guess what? His bankruptcy case was discharged because the judge found that he was not being transparent. He was not being straight up with the bankruptcy judge or the bankruptcy proceeding. So it's an open question as to how much he has. But, he probably only has a fraction of what he owes. But now that fraction will end up in the hands of Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman.
No, to that point, you had listed out a bunch of things that were valuable, but certainly don't come close to the more than $100 million that he owes Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman. So what happens moving forward? Are his wages garnished moving forward and pretty much for the rest of his life? Or does this kind of satisfy the debt from his defamation suit?
No, it does not discharge his legal responsibility for the full money judgment unless there is some kind of a deal struck between Rudy Giuliani's lawyers and the lawyers for the plaintiffs. I think that unlikely. So I think he will continue to have to pay out. And there are multiple legal mechanisms that these two women could use to try to continue collecting until he satisfies the entire debt. I will say, Brian, the reporting is that he's also fighting to try to keep some of his assets. For example, he has apparently a high-priced condo down in Florida. He's trying to have that declared as his homestead, so it will be shielded from, having to go over to satisfy that defamation judgment. There is another, I don't want to say it's a game that's being played, but something else has been reported where Rudy Giuliani is trying to maintain control of some of his property. And the story goes a little something like this. He has a number of Yankees World Series rings that are probably, worth quite a bit. And that was some of the property that Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, through their lawyers, was trying to seize, trying to include to satisfy this money judgment. And his son, Rudy Giuliani's son, I believe his name is Andrew Giuliani, said that, well, his father gave those to him as a gift. So they're really his property now, and they shouldn't be allowed to be used to satisfy the money judgment. Interestingly, the judge set a hearing on that issue, and I look forward to seeing how that testimony plays out in court and whether the judge ends up buying that claim or not.
You know, it's interesting that when we look at these lies that were disseminated in service of Donald Trump's efforts to rig the 2020 election, you would think that these Republicans would kind of look at Giuliani as a test case for what not to do, and yet right on cue, let me read a tweet that was posted by Marjorie Taylor Greene just a couple of days ago here. This happened in Whitfield County in my district, Georgia 14. We vote on Dominion voting machines. Then it prints a paper ballot with our selections made on the machines. This voter's printed ballot had been changed from their selections made on the machine. Good thing they checked the paper ballot before turning it in. After several attempts of trying to change it to reflect their correct choices, they had to void the ballot and use a different machine. Please double check your printed ballot before you turn it on to make sure that it has marked the candidates you voted for. Now, she was ultimately fact-checked by virtue of the fact that the voter wasn't having their vote switched. They had made incorrect selections. And there is a process to remedy your ballot, to print a new ballot and actually have it reflect your accurate selections. But this wasn't an example of a voting machine just not letting a Trump Marjorie Taylor Greene voter vote for their preferred Republican candidates. This was an example of a Republican voter having made the wrong choices and then trying to go back and fix it up. But of course, right on cue, we have, as soon as early voting begins in Georgia, more examples of Republicans instantly perpetuating disinformation and even invoking companies like Dominion Voting Systems, which is not a unlitigious company, and I think we can point to Fox News as a proof point of exactly that after they paid out $787 million. So isn't it interesting that even in the face of all of these damages being awarded to plaintiffs because of defamation, still Republicans cannot help themselves but fall over themselves at their own legal peril to perpetuate disinformation on Trump's behalf?
Brian, these Republicans just can't quit Donald Trump for whatever reason. This is the same old tired playbook as evidenced by that tweet you just read. And think about it. Rudy Giuliani, together with Sidney Powell and some of Donald Trump's other dirty lawyers, lost every single court challenge they tried to bring of the election's results back in 2020. And Rudy has been disbarred twice over in both states in which he was admitted to practice law as a result of his dirty, fraudulent litigation. And now we hear these same old lines being trotted out by the MTGs of the world. And I think it's because they all know that Donald Trump is going to lose the upcoming election. So they're trying to plant the seeds, and they're hoping what will blossom from those seeds is some kind of a widespread perception that when Kamala Harris wins in a landslide, as she may very well do, somehow it'll be rigged, right? Votes were stolen, votes were changed. Just like when Rudy Giuliani said, look at those two women, Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman, on videotape. Look at them. They're stuffing ballot boxes, and don't they look like drug dealers passing vials of cocaine back and forth? When in fact, it was a mother passing to her daughter a ginger mint and otherwise going about the business of poll workers exactly as they were supposed to be, conducting business. So this is more of the same old nonsense. And you know what? Just as Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, Kenneth Chesebro, John Eastman, and others are now pending felony criminal cases, some of them in multiple jurisdictions, Donald Trump's new batch of lawyers, to the extent they will do his dirty bidding this time around in 2024, are likely to suffer the same fate as the Rudys and the Sidneys.
Right, which raises this question, and I truly don't know the answer, because I just gave you an example of Marjorie Taylor Greene not learning the lesson from the 2020 election. But at the same time, do you think the fact that Rudy Giuliani is out there with nothing to his name, literally nothing, and this guy was as closely aligned to Trump as you can get. This guy had his wagon fully hitched to Donald Trump. Do you think that there is something of a deterrent effect in play, or by virtue of seeing what happens to the Rudy Giulianis of the world? Or do you just think that these guys, when they're in Trump's orbit, that they just become so enthralled by the proximity to power that they're perfectly willing to throw away their freedom, their livelihood, their future, their jobs, their law licenses, all for a pat on the head from Donald Trump?
Yeah, I actually think both things can be true. I think there is a powerful, what we call general deterrence, when, Rudy Giuliani suffers the fate he has suffered and is suffering, both in civil court, massive money judgments against him, and in criminal court. He's an indicted RICO defendant together with his co-conspirator, Donald Trump. And I do think that sends a powerful message and deters other legitimate lawyers who might look at Rudy's fate and say, you know what, I may be a conservative, I may be a hardcore Republican, I may even be inclined to vote for Donald Trump just because I hate the other, whether politically or otherwise, but I'm just not willing to suffer the same fate as Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Powell, and these other lawyers. So I think there is a powerful deterrent effect. However, I also think there are plenty of people who really live for proximity to power, and they will remain, at Donald Trump's side, doing Donald Trump's dirty bidding, trying to steal elections, unless and until they get banged out in court like Rudy Giuliani, both civilly and criminally.
And the saddest part of all of this is not just that these people will do it and put their own lives at risk, but they do it knowing that Donald Trump will plow over them the minute they lose their political usefulness. I mean, you look at the people who were closest to him, who Donald Trump has since discarded. He has basically talked shit on Kayleigh McEnany, on George Papadopoulos, on Gordon Sondland, who was his longtime donor and EU ambassador, on Ronna McDaniel. The woman literally changed her last name in deference to Donald Trump because he doesn't like her uncle. So she took that part of her name out. And yet she was unceremoniously discarded as RNC chair because Donald Trump needed someone to blame for the fact that Republicans keep losing, not understanding or willing to recognize the fact that the only reason Republicans were losing in 2018, 2020, 2022, and 2023 was not because of Ronna McDaniel. It was because the candidates were closely aligning themselves with Trump. When you look at these candidates who were losing, Dr. Oz, Herschel Walker, Doug Mastriano, Doug Bolduc, Carrie Lake. These are people who viewed themselves in the lens of Donald Trump himself. And so when they lost, is that Ronna McDaniel's fault or is it Donald Trump's fault, the people who these guys were emulating as closely as possible? And yet, still, like you said, there will be another batch of people who will pick up exactly where the previous batch left off, not recognizing that they're not special and that Trump will discard them the moment that he views them as no longer useful to him.
Yeah, Brian, it feels like we are watching the implosion of the Republican Party. And, what I attribute it to is all of these very weak Republican politicians are unwilling to make a break from Donald Trump because they have believed all along Donald Trump would fall, right? He would at some point be yesterday's news. And I think the Republican politicians who stuck by him are wanting desperately to be able to tell their supporters, their constituents, hey, I didn't abandon him. I stuck it out with him until the end, so please don't abandon me. That's what they want to tell Donald Trump's base, I believe. And that's why, they were willing to endure everything Donald Trump has done and continues to do, saying he'll be a day one dictator, saying he'll terminate portions of the Constitution, saying now that he will use the military to go after what he calls the enemy from within, that is, the Democrats. I mean, this is the stuff, this kind of stuff would make Putin blush. I mean, in its dictatorial and autocratic promises that he's making. So, it looks to me, Brian, I'm no political pundit. You know a lot more about politics than I do, but it looks like the Republican Party is about to implode, and then something will rise up from the ashes. It may be a party led by the Liz Cheneys and the Adam Kinzingers. I think it was Jeff Flake I saw come out today and say he will be supporting Kamala Harris, and he said, and I remain a Republican. But you know what? He wants quality Republicans. He doesn't want Donald Trumps to be heading up the Republican Party. So, I look forward to the day that it implodes and legitimate leadership rises up, people who love our democracy. And after they have secured, our democracy, its health and its viability, then we can all argue about policy differences. That's the way politics is supposed to work.
Yeah, and I don't think that's happening anytime soon. So in the meantime, I think as Kamala Harris has made perfectly clear, there is a space in the Democratic Party for these pro-democracy Republicans who at a bare minimum agree on the foundational promise of this country, which is just an adherence to rules, norms, laws, and the Constitution. With that said, of course, as it relates to any more news that we get from Rudy Giuliani or Trump's other disgraced lawyers or his prosecutions unto themselves, for those watching right now, please make sure to follow along. The links to both of our channels are right here on the screen. That is the best way to support our work. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.